My name is Omar Toulan. I'm a professor of strategy here at IMD Business School in Lausanne, Switzerland. And today I'd like to talk to you about the impact of COVID-19 on globalization. I want to discuss this both at the level of the macroeconomy as well as the more industrial or firm level. Now, on the one hand, COVID-19 represents the epitome of globalization in its blind disrespect for borders, and yet at the same time, it may trigger one of the most significant reversals of globalization we've seen in decades. This comes at the end of 10 years where we've seen global integration challenged by the rise of economic nationalism and protectionism. Now, the economic tailspin resulting from COVID-19 is expected to be at least, if not worse than that of the 2008 crisis. Unemployment levels in the United States only took 2 weeks to reach what it took 6 months to do so in 2008. And we're facing a recession of global proportions, where the expectation is in some parts of the world, the recession could reach more than 10% of GDP. Now, it's still uncertain how the V-shaped recovery will occur, but what is certain is that whatever the economic contraction is, globalization in the form of flows of goods and products will be negatively impacted. This drop in global demand will be compounded by the fact that governments are protecting their own and implementing policies to boost local employment at the expense of imports. Many of the government assistance programs, similar to those of the Recovery Acts of 2008, bias towards purchasing local. And as such, trade in products as well as services, such as shipping, which support them, are expected to suffer in the short to medium term, both in terms of prices as well as in terms of volumes. It should not come as a surprise if, as a result, we see more consolidation on a global basis in certain sectors. Certain industries, in particular those such as tourism and hospitality, as well as airlines, or any that involve the movement of people, are expected to be hit particularly badly. Now, as with all forms of volatility, there are both winners and losers in this situation. And the case of COVID-19 is no different. While globalization may be negatively impacting those industries which rely on the trade of goods and services, other sectors are actually benefiting. Those which include the cross-border flow of data or professional services which can easily be traded online. These are sectors which are actually benefiting as a result of the crisis. Suppliers of these services, such as Zoom or broadband providers, are also amongst the beneficiaries. Okay. Now, one of the benefits of the crisis is also that humanity is finding new and innovative ways to actually connect. And what we're seeing are things such as global hackathons. We're seeing people connecting on LinkedIn to be able to 3D print parts for ventilators. And in this sense, the world may be becoming more globalized, actually, in terms of the flow of data and information, even if we're not becoming more globalized in the flow of products. So these are some of the macro changes I see taking place, but there are also some at the company level or at the firm level, right? So when it comes to firm operations, COVID-19 adds to the pressures that we're currently seeing on supply chains. This began with the US-China trade war and firms pondering the idea of how dependent they were on single source supply. Right? Furthermore, when it comes to sectors such as healthcare, you see governments demanding greater local production in order to guarantee supply. So what implications does this have for companies which have basically built their infrastructure around centralized global sourcing? Right? Countries which have relied on low-cost labor to attract investment are being challenged in addition to this by robotics and automation. Right? And COVID-19 will only amplify this. One of the benefits of automation and robotics is that it doesn't depend on people. And in today's crisis, where non-essential workers are being asked to stay at home, automation is a solution for allowing companies to actually continue to operate. Okay. Now, how will changes in the supply chains impact the overarching strategies of firms? Right. As I just mentioned, recently what we've seen is a trend towards more centralized global efficient hubs by companies. Right? This has been the dominant form of multinational expansion for a number of years. But with COVID-19, what we're seeing is a re-questioning of the traditional global versus functional or global versus local decision making. Now, so if we are going to become more locally dispersed in terms of supply chains, will we also become more locally dispersed when it comes to decision making? And this is a question that a lot of firms are going to have to ask themselves. So while the trade flows and foreign direct investments have grown over recent years, one thing that has not actually are the global institutions that govern them. Right? As Pankaj Gemorat, a leading strategy professor, has termed, he says the world is basically in a semi-global place, where markets have been globalized, but regulatory institutions are still for the most part national or at best regional. So seen in this light, what will be the impact of COVID-19 on the sentiments towards the power of global institutions and cooperation, such as the WHO, the UN, or the OECD? Will we repeat the era that followed World War I, in which we saw the development of weak institutions such as the League of Nations? Or will we come to recognize that global problems require global solutions with credible global institutions to support them? Right? The reality is that the rise of populism over the past decade has resulted in the weakening of institutions of global cooperation, fostered by an us-first approach to national politics. The direction we take will greatly depend upon the leadership styles exhibited by the dominant powers today. Will leaders strengthen their nationalistic and in some cases xenophobic tendencies, playing the blame game and labeling COVID-19 a foreign virus? Or will we see greater cooperation amongst the leading powers? As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has implied, we have gone from a bipolar world to a unipolar and to finally a no-polar world, where global powers, be they friends or foes, are unable to work together. This lack of hegemony currently threatens any chance of a global solution. So, going forward, I would say there are some signs of optimism. Okay? One of these is the cross-border cooperation amongst the scientific community, right? As they seek solutions to the current crisis. Also at the community level, we're seeing plenty of examples at the national and local level of assistance and cooperation, even when government actions lag. In the UK, for instance, when there was a request for people to help the NHS, they were hoping to get 250,000 volunteers. They got over 500,000. The question remains, however, to see whether this sense of civic unity can be transposed to the international arena from its current national level. So, with the world today, what I view is that we have a fork in the road, and we have to make a decision. The path we take towards globalization will have broad and long-lasting implications, not only for business, but more importantly, for how we confront future challenges to humanity.